Welcome to Law Talk Today, a series devoted to bringing you informative and educational programs focused on issues of law, government, and community. Hello, and welcome to Law Talk Today. I'm Dan Agatino, your host. Joining us in studio today is Andy Myers. Andy, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a filmmaker.
Not exactly. I'm a film distributor.
A film distributor.
Yes.
Tell us what that means.
Well, a film distributor is sort of like a wholesaler. He or she determines how to position the film, what theaters to put it in, when to avail the non-theatrical mediums, namely home video and pay television and so on.
How do you make a decision? So if I come to you and I say, I have this great film, it's about an Italian attorney by day and ninja by night, or whatever the craziness is, and you say, okay, let's put it here.
Yeah. Well, that would be a tricky undertaking. But nonetheless, what we typically do, if it's a finished film, we're going to evaluate it on its merits. Is it engaging? Is it emotive? Does it transport you in one form or another? Are the characters empathetic? And is it a good ride from start to finish?
So you actually evaluate in the way that a critic would, a way
similarly,
someone,
yes.
to appreciate it, to say.
And most importantly, or certainly of equal importance, is there a hook? Is there an obvious way to sell it to an audience? So those are the low-hanging fruits that we pay a lot of attention to.
When you talk about the hook, tell us what that means for those people who are unfamiliar with it. Obviously, it means to draw people in, but what's a hook in? Well,
I mean, obviously, in a bigger context, the film The Avengers is a brand, and tens of millions of people are aware of the Avengers brand, as they are the Dark Knight, as they are all of the Marvel characters. So that would be, I shouldn't say easy, but less challenging than finding a hook for an Italian attorney by day and a ninja by night.
Good idea, though.
Yeah.
What about this?
Good luck with it. Yeah.
What about if you do have a more serious script than my nonsense? You have somebody who they've written a piece that you believe is meritorious, that it has a hook, but you appreciate it. You're not sure if audiences would. Has that ever happened?
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Oftentimes. Unfortunately, in today's context, that kind of film is faced with a tremendous number of obstacles, because typically the studios, as we now know them, are loath to produce and or distribute a film of that nature, which has a more narrow reach appeal, and requires much more ingenuity to position it properly. Unlike yesteryear, when it was very common, what you're speaking of. But there are plenty of independents, and for that matter, boutiques owned by the studios who make that kind of film their mainstay. And it requires specialized handling. It requires support from critics, editorial coverage, feature stories, actors and the director, stumping for the film, appearing on various talk shows, online, making appearances wherever they can, premieres, film festivals, and often online. In fact, invariably now online there's a campaign that supports the conventional campaign. So it's certainly a fair proposition, but it's trickier.
Can you tell us, do you think that films that don't fall into that category, films that are going to be for general distribution, theatrical release, are formulaic in a way now that they weren't in the past? Because you had said that you think, well, there used to be a place for these independent films, now there's less of a place, or it's not supported
I think
in a way that it used to be.
I mean, the definition of independent is forever changing. I guess for the purpose of this discussion, an independent film is one that isn't released by a studio. Actually, one that isn't financed and or released by a studio. And it can be commercial. It can be mainstream. And it doesn't necessarily have to be upscale. But in the absence of studio distribution, studio support, the independent filmmaker and producer have their hands full, because the studios collectively have a huge piece of the market. They, in the aggregate, represent close to 90%.
How many studios do you know? Because you say the studios in the plural, and there's only a few.
Yeah.
That
Well,
5,
there's
10, 25?
there's 20th Century Fox, there's Paramount, there's Universal, there's Columbia, Sony, there's Warner Brothers, and Disney.
Okay.
And MGM is perhaps a bright light on the horizon.
Because they were great, then they sold off their
Yes.
film rights, and they
They have reconstituted themselves, and
Okay.
I mean, at the moment they're distributing through Sony. So the new Bond, Skyfall, is opening in November via Sony, worldwide.
Well, what about places?
But MGM, I believe, is doing the marketing.
So we see that more often than in the past, where two competitors will now become.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of
Interesting.
consolidation, which is both good and bad, and I think that's probably the biggest change in recent memory. Whereas in yesteryear, there was a much broader selection of distributors.
What about something like DreamWorks, something like Lionsgate?
Well, DreamWorks,
something like,
I suppose, could be considered a studio too. They don't do their own distribution. They distribute through Disney. Lionsgate is a formidable independent. I suppose they could classify as a studio, given their output and given the breadth of the company, and they do their own distribution.
So what you're talking about is a little complicated, because you said, for our purposes, we'll define independence this way, but it's broader. We're talking about studios, but it's more nuanced. The whole business seems like it's not easy to compartmentalize and define. Is that fair?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, the truth of the matter is, those companies that we just spoke of are in a class by themselves, and then there's everyone else. And you know, the various advantages they enjoy aren't necessarily available to everyone else. I mean, most of them, for example, they all have strong relationships with exhibitors because they're prolific, and they provide at least one, often as many as 3 tentpole films a year. So their relationships with exhibitors are tight, all of them, from Regal down. And they have relationships with all of the digital outlets. Well, in the case of Universal, Universal's owned by Comcast. So Uh, and of course, all of the premium channels, they each have output deals with one of them.
Or own them, like Warner Brothers is Time Warner.
Owns HBO, right. And then in the case of over-the-air free television, Viacom owns, CBS owns CBS, and Comcast owns NBC, and Fox owns Fox, and Disney owns ABC. So there's a lot of vertical integration here, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time.
When you talk about this, there may be somebody in our viewing audience who's saying, I want to do this. I love this business. I want to get into it. And you're talking about, well, there's benefits to the world of filmmaking and distribution now that weren't available in the past, but there's also detriments. So take us on a journey to the past, the good old days. What's different now than back then that you
well,
missed?
I think that in yesteryear, for example, the 70s, films were, for the most part, championed by creative people.
Mm-hmm.
Both producers, directors, writers, and studio executives, too. They were all creative. I'm not suggesting that they're not creative now, but there was a different criteria employed back then. It was more, we really dig this, and rather than employing all of these algorithms that determine whether or not the project is financially viable, it was more about, we dig this, we believe in it, we believe in the director's vision, we love the script, we think it's...
And the algorithms don't always work, right? Ergo, John Carter of Mars.
Right. We think it's original, we think it's wonderful, let's do it. Now, of course, the cost of making, for example, The French Connection was a fraction of what it cost to make The Bourne Legacy.
Right. With the new installment coming out this August. And
that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, typically now, between the cost of the film and the cost of distribution and marketing, you're looking at about $200 million.
For just your average...
That's pretty much the...
tentpole film. That's going to be
That's not even tentpole necessarily.
No? Okay.
No. Anywhere from, I would say, 150 to 200 million is what you're looking at almost every time, with few exceptions. You're going to have some that are quite a bit higher, like The Avengers and Dark Knight Rises and John Carter, and some which are lower, romantic comedies, teen comedies. Even the animated films are extremely expensive.
Well, let's talk about that, because part of the expense is that we see special effects. If the Avengers were made in the 70s, it would not be as exciting of a film, perhaps because they don't have CGI technology and things like that. Do you think that creative minds rely too heavily on all these special effects?
Some might. Certainly someone like Chris Nolan doesn't. I think he uses them very advantageously. And you'll see this weekend when Batman opens.
Mm-hmm. And
I mean, we saw evidence of it with Inception, with the last Batman.
Right.
So there are some who do.
There's a nice integration by Nolan.
Yeah, there are some who do, and there are some who don't.
And
but getting back to yesteryear, there was a very different appetite on the part of cinema goers, on the part of film enthusiasts. I mean, and furthermore, it wasn't about appealing to the lowest, it wasn't necessarily about appealing to the lowest common denominator. It wasn't about skewing to the 16 or 14 to 24-year-olds. It was more about making a great movie that would, in all likelihood, cross over. And it wasn't until, and that's pretty much how the industry was for a long time. It wasn't until Jaws in 1975 that the industry changed profoundly.
Do you think that one film was a paradigm-shifting event?
Absolutely. Because, first of all, it broke box office records all over the world. But it was also so popular that Universal smartly fanned it out. In yesteryear, films were released usually on one screen per market.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly but surely, based on support, based on popularity, they would fan out. They would add theaters in the suburbs, if there were any. With Jaws, it may have opened in 6 to 8 theaters in New York City, which by today's standards seems almost anemic, but nonetheless. And likewise in every major market. So there might have been as many as 700 or 800 screens opening on release or shortly thereafter. And then it would fan out even further.
And its popularity just led to.
And so that, over the course of the next 20 years, led to what we now have, which is between 3,000 and 4,000 screens.
There may be some audience members who are saying, well, this is all very interesting, but I'm watching a law program, and so I'm going to tie this into the law in 2 different ways.
Well, we're not breaking the law.
We're not breaking the law. We're not.
Have you ever broken the law?
Have I ever broken the law? I'm on camera now. You realize that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Moving on.
Yeah.
So if you have something to say about the legal aspect of it, let me ask it in this way. The films that were made in the past were obviously concerned about copyright and that nobody was pirating them, but here we have so much digital technology. Can you talk a little bit about the concerns for the smaller, we'll say independent filmmaker, about not getting their material either taken from them or distributed improperly, or is that ever a concern? Is that something that you worry about as a distributor, pirating?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all do. I mean, it's out of control, or perhaps it's improving, or the remedies are abating it to some extent. But it costs the industry, if I'm not mistaken, about $6 to $8 billion a year.
Which is a massive amount. I mean, it's just
it's a lot more than we have.
When you think about the connection between what you do as a distributor and what you were saying earlier about the creative minds that used to control, do you ever feel that the law gets in the way in the sense of this? I'd love to do this, but you're going to have to get a contract written that's going to have to be reviewed by an entertainment lawyer, then you're going to have to make sure that...
Well, I do think there's a lot more red tape. It's not so much the law. There is a lot more red tape now than there used to be with respect to gaining any kind of recognition, fostering a connection with a decision maker who may option your screenplay or finance your film, or for that matter, license your film upon completion. And if you want to go the agency route, you're faced with obstacles there as well, because they typically don't want to hear from you unless you're established.
Is that a catch-22? We don't want to hear from you until you're established. You can't get established until we hear from you, and so it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, you can find a way to circumvent all of these obstacles, but it's can I say pain in the ass?
You can.
It's a pain in the ass. Yeah, and probably unnecessarily so. With the studios, if you have a relationship, great. If you don't, in all likelihood, they won't respond to you.
Then let's explore this from a chronological perspective. Somebody has an idea. They get an angel investor who's going to fund the idea. It's not $200 million, but it's enough to put a film together. They make the film, then they bring it to you?
They could, or they could screen it at a festival, or they could screen it for the industry. They could set up a screening, a private screening, in New York and or Los Angeles for distributors.
When you go to a festival, though, aren't usually there terms that say, you agree that you will not send this to any other festival till we air it?
Yeah.
So you can't send it to 10 festivals that are at the same time.
No.
You have to be exclusive.
No, but I mean, if you're debuting the film at the Sundance Film Festival and you're in the dramatic competition, that's going to draw a lot of attention to your film. Whether or not it gets picked up remains to be seen, but you're going to have critics, you're going to have distributors, you're going to have sales agents, you're going to have everyone at your fingertips. Well, not so much at your fingertips, but they're all there. The community is there, and it's incumbent upon you to work the festival and channel your film into the best people's hands.
Earlier in our conversation, I came up with a ridiculous plot line of an attorney by day, ninja by night.
Yeah.
Do you ever have people who bring these ideas that you think is equally ridiculous, but they're passionate behind it? They think that this is the most wonderful thing, and that it's...
It's not so much an idea that I hear. I mean, I would read screenplays. An idea doesn't, in as much as it's fine to have a chit-chat about ideas, but I don't typically make any kind of move based on an idea.
Right.
And furthermore, I don't think I mean, if it's an idea coming from Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese, yes, or Tim Burton, yes, but otherwise, no.
Let's talk about some of those names, not specifically, but the bright stars of the industry. The man who made Jaws helped to create this whole new paradigm. Do you feel that they're constrained too, in that they have to cater to the 16 to 24-year-old market? And that
they're not.
No, they could go beyond that and go do their thing.
Yeah.
And still make some money on the deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're not constrained at all. But plenty are. They've pretty much paid their dues. I mean, they're amongst the finest filmmakers in the world. So if Steven Spielberg wanted to make a feature about the phone book, I think he probably could. When
you think about your career and where you've been...
It's nothing like Steven's.
Nothing like Steven's.
No.
You say that with a little lament. Have you enjoyed working in this industry?
For the most part, yeah. I like that it's creative. I like that it's forever changing. And I was born into it, so I've been around it for a long time.
What don't you like about the industry? That I don't know if you can say.
There's a lot of time wasting.
Okay, so that's frustrating for you? The idea that you could get this done and get it done well, but there's all these obstacles.
I mean, I would liken it to real estate. A real estate agent represents a client for weeks, perhaps months, trying to sell that poor slob a house. And over the course of 4, 6, 8, 12 months, it doesn't happen. There's another client. Doesn't happen with her. There's another client. May happen with him in 6 months. It's sort of like that.
So it's a numbers game in some ways?
Yes. Yes. You do expend an awful lot of time wastefully based on the outcome, which is nothing.
When you say based on the outcome, which is nothing, you mean that you put an enormous amount of effort and energy into trying to promote a film or trying to put a deal together, and it fizzles out, and then you start from scratch?
You either drop it and move on to something else, or you try something different. Yeah.
Disheartening, or just the nature of the beast for you?
Well, it is disheartening. I mean, it's disheartening for everybody. But it is also the nature of the beast, yes. Oftentimes, films are in gestation for years, and big ones, too.
They shelf them and just...
I mean, Moneyball was in gestation for about 5, 6 years before it got made. It's not uncommon. It happens. And your patience is certainly tested.
Can you tell us in our remaining moments, has there ever been anything that came into your business and you liked it so much that you said, I'm going to put my own money into this? Something that you were so passionate about that you
no, my own? No.
said, no.
No. But I will tell you this. There were two films. I mean, there have been a number of films that I have distributed which I liked immensely and believed would work. But there were two, the first of which was Dirty Dancing, produced by Vestron, a company that has long since passed. Vestron was primarily a video company. And they were fortunate in that Dirty Dancing was at MGM in turnaround, and MGM didn't renew their option, found its way to Vestron. The film was made for $5 million, financed entirely by Vestron. And upon screening the finished film, they were not convinced by any stretch of the imagination that it would work theatrically. They were very divided on its commercial prospects. I happened to be in Cannes for the very first time in the spring of 1987. And I was pretty much like a fish out of water, being the first time there. They speak French there, you know.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So it was the first Sunday of the festival, and I was walking sort of aimlessly past the Carlton Hotel.
Okay.
A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, who was working for Vestron at the time, actually running distribution for them, she saw me, and we exchanged pleasantries, got caught up, and she mentioned to me that her film Dirty Dancing would be screening in the market, not in the festival, later that day, in the mid-afternoon. Would I go see it? Because I didn't mention I'm from Canada originally. I've been here for 10 years. I'm not a socialist, so don't worry.
Thank you.
Anyway, would you go see it, because we need distribution in Canada? So I went to see it. I actually arrived to the screening late. There were 3 Asian men sitting at the back, and they were all sleeping. I come in about 35 minutes late. I watch this film, and I think to myself, wow, I like this. And I was shocked, because I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. I regrouped with my friend, asked her if she would send the print to Toronto, where I would screen it for Cineplex Odeon, our principal customer,
right.
Which I did, and they loved it. We all loved it, and the film did about $70 million.
$5 million to 70 is a good, in 1986 dollars.
Yeah.
That's a good deal.
And the other one that was bittersweet was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Ang Lee's film.
Right.
Which first screened in Cannes.
We only have a minute left, so tell us the quick version.
First screened in Cannes, and then screened as a gala at the Toronto Film Festival. Won the Audience Award, which was a coveted award. Critics were flipping out. The audience, needless to say, was flipping out. There was a lot of momentum. The film opened in early December. Limited release, I think about 6 markets in North America, broke house records everywhere, and went on to gross $135 million in North America, biggest foreign language film ever,
It was great.
prior to the Passion of the Christ.
Right.
So that was a joy to work on too.
Thank you for sharing all these stories with us, and
My
thank
pleasure.
you for tuning in. I'm
Thank you.
Dan Agatino, your host.